The purpose of this segment is to summarize progress towards identifying the opportunities and impediments for scaling of technological innovations. Towards this goal, in the past year, we have identified efforts to collect quantitative and qualitative data from the field. And in this segment, we will summarize our efforts to date. So our progress so far is that we have developed quantitative and qualitative data collection instruments to understand multiple issues related to scaling, especially with respect to technology, human capital, and institutional gaps and opportunities. We have conducted training of field agents, and we have begun the data collection process, and we are in the process of identifying the patterns that are emerging from the data and the type of hurdles that we are observing. So in terms of assessment of scaling levels, we are using the following broad framework. The way technology or any type of innovation is scaled in the field is that there is first a beginning point where some farmers initiate the use. These are generally known as the first movers. They may be either influential farmers, or they may be related to the project team, or they may have already had identified other innovations that they have moved forward on. And then when these different initiatives start to gain momentum, multiple influential groups emerge. And then there is a critical mass where multiple stakeholder pools and institutions such as banks and governments and other manufacturers realize this potential, and formal initiatives are established. And the final phase is institutionalization, where these practices are perceived as normal by stakeholders, in the sense that a farmer believes that their farm is incomplete without the technology. So that is the life cycle of scaling. So far what we've done is we've developed instruments, we have identified target groups to administer the instruments, we have trained field agents, we have translated these instruments, we have pilot tested these instruments, we have recruited participants, we have conducted discussions, and we've collected data, and we are currently in the process of analyzing data. Once we analyze the data and do both quantitative and qualitative modeling of the data, we will be able to develop action plans with respect to the next steps to look at what can we do next to speed up the scaling process. So we developed two types of instruments. One is Technology Readiness Assessment Instrument, the TRA. This instrument, developed by Dr. Hansen, who will be speaking after me to explain the instrument, has already been tested in the field. So it's an established instrument which collects quantitative data from farmer users and non-users. In addition, we also developed a new instrument, the gap analysis, which collects qualitative data from farmer users and value chain members. We developed these instruments and we translated them into local languages. And in the next step, we identified target groups. We made sure that there was wide representation because as we know, scaling gaps may be more prevalent in one group than in the other. So we have male and female farmers, youth farmers, artisans, blacksmiths, political leaders, bureaucratic representatives, farmer cooperatives, local bankers, farm equipment suppliers, non-governmental organizations, and university representatives. And then after that, we trained and translated the instruments and pilot tested them. The field agents were graduate students, project team members. We conducted the pilots, and the sites in Burkina Faso, we had 3 sites, and in Bangladesh, we had 3 sites. So we pilot tested and then administered those instruments in those sites. So the gap analysis instrument is a 13-page qualitative instrument, and we first ran a one-day training program to train the trainers for qualitative data collection. A sample training agenda is provided here. We summarize the overall goals. We talked about the technology. We talked about the agenda for data collection. We did gender integration issues. We did some breakout groups, and then we concluded. In here, we see a sample of the training materials that we developed. We provided some background about how to collect quantitative and qualitative data, and this is just a sample of some of the materials we used. And then in terms of the implementation, we had two facilitators, one facilitator to ask the questions, one note taker. We allotted about 3 hours per group. We made sure that everyone talks, so the trainers were trained to look out for that. And we wanted to get some level of agreement or consensus on each question. For each question, we provided a narrative so that the data collection agents can determine whether scaling is easy, neutral, or harder. And this just provides a sample of how we provided a narrative for each question. Now, Dr. Hansen is going to talk about the technology readiness assessment tool that he administered. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan. So just to repeat, so as mentioned, a key objective for the ASMC in phase 2 is the scaling up of appropriate technologies that were identified or developed, tested, evaluated in each country in phase 1. And so the question is, how do we assess their relative level of readiness, sustainability, resilience for deployment on both a country and a regional basis? What sort of questions should we be asking? In terms of the objectives, so this was a 3-page quantitative instrument, and the objective was to perform a quantitative assessment, as has been already mentioned, of the potential adoption of technologies identified, tested, and evaluated in phase 1 of the project, and targeting very much current users and non-users of the technology. And the goal was to obtain information on the challenges for adoption from these groups. And the benefit of this approach was collecting quantifiable data using standardized questions. The topics covered in the questionnaires, the questionnaire was obviously the respondent demographics was important to know, the technology effectiveness relative to performance in terms of productivity and work rate, the status of access to power sources for the technology, and also the relative importance to the farmer regarding local manufacture of the technology, and also the local servicing capacity for that technology. Economic considerations, such as the ability of the farmer to afford ownership of the technology, was important, and what they would be willing to pay, and also for them access to financing. The ease of use of the technology obviously was important, and this we wanted to make sure included women and youth, and then how safe it was to actually operate this technology. And then finally, what training is necessary to operate the technology as perceived by the farmer. As far as the data collection agenda was concerned, some of this was already mentioned by Dr. Krishnan. So the participants, both adopters and potential adopters, and we had facilitators in terms of graduate students from universities in each country, namely Burkina Faso and Bangladesh. And the target size for the groups was about 50. And each day we set aside about 8 hours for the collection of information. Part of it was an introduction to the farmers or the groups, a field demonstration of the technology, an opportunity for questions and answers, and then the actual filling out of the instrument, where we had sort of 5 people per group of farmers, and together coming up with answers to the questions. And then finally, actual presentations by the farmer groups relative to their questions, and some discussion of lessons learned. The current status, as already mentioned, we have collected some data in Burkina Faso and Bangladesh. In Burkina Faso, we had a group of 64 with 42 males and 22 females. And this occurred in 3 venues there, Hande, Bobodalaso, and Oradara. And then in Bangladesh, a total of 36 people or farmers, 22 males, 14 females. And this occurred in 3 divisions of Bangladesh at Kona, Barisal, and Mime Singh. And I should mention that the data, as already has been said, the data is being processed at the moment, and we hope to be able to disseminate it in the near future. And of course, future data will be collected from Cambodia and in Senegal as well. So with that, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of myself and also Dr. Ranjani Krishnan for this opportunity to present these details about the scaling gap analysis and the technology readiness assessment. Thank you.